compelling than in the urban cities, where the exodus of urban migration will only continue, and where technology and innovation can play a very important role and can bring about high impact on social, economic, as well as environmental needs. And to make all this happen, we need to look at the fundamental layer, which is the transactional layer. And as we get into the value exchange on the internet, or what we now are coining as the internet of value, how does this exchange that even goes to machine, how do we make this basic value transactional exchange to be safe, secure, easy, as well as inclusive? Okay, and to have this conversation, and we are going to have a conversation, we have 4 panelists with us, and we'll be discussing on the how element of it. And just to have a sense of the audience, can I just a show of hands, those that you would consider yourself to be highly technical, from a technical background? Okay, so not that panelists, not that many, yes? So let us... Okay, all right. I believe you, Tufi. So let's start off with you, Tufi. Tufi, you can read his bio, a very illustrious bio. But to summarize it, serial entrepreneur, and a stellar track record in algorithms, machine learning, as well as cryptocurrency. And what I found interesting is that you are leading a movement called the AI Decentralized Movement, where brings together the collision of AI, blockchain, as well as cryptocurrency developers and development. So, to get the discussion started, Tufi, can you just tell us how are these technologies coming together? You're really in the frontier of the most disruptive forces.
Cryptography has been evolving for the last 30 or 40 years, and same with AI. But in the last 8 years, has been rapidly progressing outside of the academia in a way that it's not being centralized anywhere. We were not noticing that they're collaborating together. So with AI Decentralized, the mission is to collide 870,000 AI practitioners globally with 280,000 blockchainers. But the so-called blockchainers used to be called cryptographers, whatnot, but that's been around for quite some time. It started with Bitcoin in 2008, and then folks started calling it blockchain. It's a branch of AI one way or another, with a multi-agent system. That's how AI practitioners refer to it. But the evolution that's happened with Bitcoin, it's quite phenomenal. That for the first time in the history of humanity, we're able to run a system that is not owned by a human. It owns itself. Nobody owns Bitcoin. Bitcoin's been running by itself. It's like an autonomous machine running by itself for 8.5 years. In one of the articles that I posted recently, that autonomous AI will disrupt banking long before it disrupts driving, and hopefully this disruption will be for bettering humanity in so many ways, and that's why we're hoping you can bring this decentralized governance to the AI folks to enhance human lives.
So when you talk about decentralization of governance, and how will this then impact the interconnectivity? Talking about decentralization, but then when you decentralize, and how do you facilitate the transaction at not only at the local level, at the localized level, but also inter-country?
So if we look at the globe, and most people don't have the ability to buy servers or cloud or big machines that is running certain processing like a bank or whatnot, but they all have smartphones. If we're able to provide decentralized governance using the smartphones, rather than just a smartphone to be like you use it today, it connects to a certain server, and you're trusting that Facebook is posting that, or Twitter, or your bank is taking your money, putting it from here to there. It's just functioning as a centralized database. You're dependent, you're trusting somebody. Meanwhile, 70% of the world do not trust their own government or any bank. And we need to give them a technology that can be fully decentralized in a way. And decentralized here, it's an autonomous decentralized governance that we refer to. It's a security model that can increase the amount of security by 1,000-fold, in a way that if you were to have something that we refer to as a smart contract, there's no one that can change their mind after that fact. And that smart contract would be just a transaction. I'm paying you $3 for a banana or 30 cents for a banana, whatever we agree to. And then we can have that exchange in a way that it's not up to somebody to decide where and who to use your money that you save. You're in control of your money, you're in control of your real estate, it's all around the human-centric and not a certain database or government.
So if you look at the innovation on the technology perspective, okay, you've talked about it, but you know, it's not only just about the technological innovation, it's also about the business model innovation. And in some ways also, you talked about also how to simplify and not to burden the consumers with the sophistication of technology. So can you expand on that?
Sure. If we were to count on altruism alone, it won't cut it. We need to have a model that activates the greed element that most people have, and in some aspects the fear element. Then folks would start doing something. And the way we looked at the data that exists in the world that we live in, $940 billion are being spent per year for transaction costs, okay? But if you look at the financial institutions, they collect about $8.3 trillion. So that's about 9 times more money in non-transaction fees, okay? So from that perspective, when you start seeing like, okay, how about if we remove that 940 billion and open up that market to the rest of the world? Can we provide that opportunity to the financial services along with a lot of other things? If we get to prosperity sooner, what happens to folks that they start buying products that we make? So if we sell more products, it's better for all of us, and better for the people that they're struggling to buy food at the end of the day. So from that perspective, I feel that we activate the greed element into getting businesses to be more prosperous as well as people, then we're able to get there sooner.
Right, so Tu Phi, we'll hold that thought, because how we're going to do this is I'm going to ask the first level of questions to all the panelists, and then we will then go into open up the floor to them to be asking each other questions, as well as from the audience in the room. So you talked about decentralization, which requires this whole concept of trust. So I want to go then next to Jane and take that conversation further. So yeah, I'm going to change a little bit the order and discuss. So Jane, just a quick introduction. She's with the World Bank and a long career in government as well as government-related organizations, and in particular advising governments on digital transformation. Right? So Jane, Tu Phi spoke about this whole building trust model, and we've heard these conversations around to make this whole decentralization and what technology can bring to the concept of decentralization. You still need the element of trust and consent architecture. So can you talk a little bit more about that whole, especially in an environment where governments are not necessarily associated with trust anymore? So how would you then build this concept of trust and consent?
Right, and thank you very much for that question. I suppose that in the time I've worked in government and before all of these emerging technologies that have really rattled the cage, I say, the nature of trust is between two parties, or a third party, I guess, when a government has an agency. And a lot of what we did maybe 10, 20 years ago in looking at how to bring a smart front to government so that citizens could confidently interact without wasting a lot of time, not having to know the rules, have a sort of a key to online transactions, and to get that response, that actually elevated trust. Even knowing that government was keen to provide one-stop shops so that there was a sense of service and responsiveness. Then came the online world or self-service, where government was more distant in the provision of information. But it certainly helped in the convenience factor. And I can remember around 2006, it was exciting news that the UK government had finally, as one of many, actually accepted that standing in line was a cost to individuals of £16 an hour, which we didn't actually agree with the quantum, but at least they'd actually accepted that that people waste time in queues, and in fact that had a big impact in terms of business productivity.
You don't agree with £16, but is that,
no.
You think it's higher or lower?
Well, probably higher. Well, it depends what you're doing at the time, I guess. So again, this was the relationship between government and citizen, and how that relationship was transacted, be it around services or taxation, etc. Now we have, with the sort of digital world, the nature of institutions, the regulations that governments construct in order to achieve some revenue or to provide a safe environment for living, working, playing in the country. Now we have sort of the means by which that relationship is transacted, relying on identity and its authentication, and that's where I sort of might skirt to the fact that there are 1.2 billion people without an identity. There are 2.9 billion people that don't have a bank account, and therefore therefore how can self-service and taxes and pensions be paid? If they don't have that. Then there are 3.9 billion that are without internet connectivity. So then the role of government is to, in the ideal sense, is to facilitate that closure of the gap, so that people can get to a point where many of us have been hearing or considering what the nature of a smart city and a smart resident or a smart business might be, and it relies on those components.
Okay, so I'll hold that thought now for you, but let's move on to two other things that you mentioned. First, you mentioned about 1.2 billion with no identity. Then you also mentioned 3.9 billion, I'm not sure that you mentioned it just now or was earlier, 3.9 billion people are not connected. So I'm going to go now to Daniel and talk a little bit about the infrastructure, the network infrastructure. So Daniel is from Nokia, and he's the quintessential telco professional. 15 years in telco, doing almost everything, and in almost all parts of the world. I think that's a good summary of your profession, of your professional career. So let's talk about these networks and infrastructure requirements, and especially if you can talk about what are the bets that you are making as one of the largest telco companies in the world, and in particular the bets you're making around closing the gap of these 3.9 billion people that are not yet connected.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I think from our perspective, or any infrastructure perspective, we've seen the challenge of regulation being our biggest block when we talk about covering 3.9 million people. I think we're working aggressively to capture that, but within the same time, we're seeing the need of platforms coming in, IoT coming in, smart cities coming in. All of these things that we talk about, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, peer-to-peer lending, picking up on what Tofi was saying, was about using the phone ultimately as the device that we kind of interact on. These platforms are creating a bigger challenge than the infrastructure itself. To enable the infrastructure, we need to get the regulation, the cities working together to create a horizontal platform where it's just not about connectivity, it's about security, it's about scale, it's about peer-to-peer transactions, it's about device management, biometric security, facial recognition. All of these things come into our bucket of things that we need to resolve. So our bets are clearly to obviously lead in terms of network infrastructure, push ourselves with the service providers and government and regulators to get the spectrum that we need to build the capacity as we move from 4G to 5G. Further on, take the shared infrastructure domain. We need to build citywide networks which are shared, IP infrastructure which is shared, and then regulated within the cities and the government. So this decentralization that, again, going back to what we talked about, is secure. This decentralization needs to be secure, and we could get into a sort of a discussion, but there are many parties in this decentralization in blockchain. Is government going to be one of those parties? And we need to look at what their role is going to be. So we're challenging the focus the government has, the way the regulation has been created in the past. It's not moving fast enough. We can tell you now, a spectrum allocation in this part of the world can take anywhere from a year and a half to 3 years. I'm not going to call out countries. If you look at how long it takes and how bureaucratic that process is, we can't continue to have that kind of blockages with technology that is moving in 100 times faster than network infrastructure deployment has been in the past. The other importance of infrastructure and the bets we're making is about network scale. Now that changes with 5G. We talk about network infrastructure, we talk about IoT, we talk about billions and billions of devices. You pick up a different publication, somebody will talk about 50 billion, 75 billion, it can get scarier, as scary as you want it to be. So the purpose here for connectivity is for it to scale. What we build today should be able to scale, should be able to provide capacity for these transactions. The type of transaction is going to change. It's not about bandwidth and video watching, it's about the number of transactions that we're able to do, the number of devices that we can get on the network. So I think this urbanization aspect brings in new challenges for building that capacity. That will come in the next 2 to 3 years with 5G. We're seeing a lot of different technology from a radio perspective. We talk about virtualization, cloud, that's changing. We're putting content closer to the user with things like mobile edge computing, where people can look at, feel things, do things for autonomous driving. It needs to be closer to the user. So all of these things need to come together, and we're playing a vital role in building that ecosystem. And that'll be my closing to your question, is that no longer is it about network infrastructure, no longer is it about banking, and no longer is it about, no longer is it about the service provider, the government. It is about the citizens. So it is about the cross-sector